Welcome back out to the SHIELD Armory. Thanks for tuning in with us today. It's a little bit different day. We are short one chaplain.
We are indeed. In the words of Gareth Stevenson, he is frolicking about the countryside on a SHIELD Outdoors trip to some undisclosed location, doing undisclosed things. So you might want to send up a prayer for Stevenson. I don't know if you'll get to hear this before he's back, but we are short one chaplain, but I think we're going to be able to rock out this episode just the same.
If I had to guess, he's living out his life motto of taking chances and making memories. So
yeah, that's what I'm afraid of.
Yeah. So who knows what that's going to look like when what we hear about when he gets back. So, but we're looking forward to having him back. But for today, I am Chaplain Hughes. I'm here with Chaplain Potter, and we have a special guest on with us today, and so we're super excited to have him on. We are going to be talking about something very specific for why we have him here. But before we tell you what we're talking about, I'd like for him to introduce himself.
Well, good morning. Thank you for having me here. My name is Mark Gilbert. I'm a captain at Carilion Police Department here in Roanoke. Been there now for 8.5 years, going on 9, after retiring down in Martinsville. And I oversee the Eastern Division security, so I have like 4 hospitals. I oversee Roanoke Memorial Community Hospital, Lexington Hospital, and Franklin Hospital. So I'm a pretty busy guy.
Yeah,
I would say so. It's hard to believe you've been there that long.
Yeah, it's flown by. It's absolutely flown by. But, that happens when, you're in a place where you like to be and the time flies, and it usually drags when you don't like to be there. But Carilion's been one of the best experiences I've ever had in employment.
Man, that's really cool. So just a side note, I think that's kind of funny. I grew up in Martinsville. I was born and raised in Ridgeway and grew up in the Henry County area. You lived there, and you lived in Martinsville for a while.
Absolutely. Went from Martinsville to L.A., Lower Axton, for those of you from that area. But yeah, and actually, Mark and I have some shared roots anyway. He's not too much older than me, but he was in youth group with a couple of my older brothers, and I suspect that's where you met your wife.
I didn't meet her at church. She brought me to church.
Oh, there you go.
Okay. So that'll do that. Sometimes.
Absolutely, we've seen that played out through the years several times.
Yeah, your middle brother Tim actually just helped me build a shed about 3 months ago.
Okay,
I was needing another hand, and I didn't need any expertise.
Okay, I was really concerned there for a minute,
but I needed a hand. Yeah, and he was great hands for me. So
he's a good worker, good helper like I am. But you probably don't want either one of us being the brains of the operation to build anything.
No cutting, no nailing. We just hold that for me. But he was fantastic. I couldn't have done it without him.
I was going to say, Darren, you keep talking about wanting to add like a deck out back of your house. I was thinking maybe this was your opportunity to pull your brother in to do that. But
no. He'd bring me a few pallets or something. But no, Tim's a great guy. He's good. But yeah, we should move on from this. You do not want us doing any construction for you.
Tim, nothing but love for you, man. That's all we have. So we've got nothing but love for you. So,
and also a cool thing too. Actually, Mark and I've got twin daughters, and Mark has a daughter, and they were born the same exact day.
Really?
Wow, that's crazy.
May 26th.
May 26th.
Wow. I have a great story on that one.
Okay.
So my dad passed away 11 months before my daughter was born, and so I'm a 2-time cancer survivor.
Yeah.
So we had to do fertility. And so the day before I had to do my chemo, they said, if you ever want to have a child, you got to do this. So comes time for us, I've now cleared from cancer, and we're moving on, and we decided it's time to have a child. Looks like I'm going to live, and we have my wife is inseminated. So my wife actually gets pregnant in North Carolina while I'm in court. So explain that one.
There you go.
And so the doctor tells us, he says, whatever you do, don't go to the pharmacy and get a pregnancy test. Don't do it. Whatever you do, don't do that. Wait till you come back. Of course, we couldn't wait. So we go, and it's negative. we just spent probably $15,000,
Oh, my
and it's
gosh.
negative, and we're kind of crushed, really.
Sure.
So we go to back to Baptist, and we have the test, and he comes back and he says, "Oh, you're pregnant." We're like, "What?" And so he pulls out his calendar, and he says, Let me figure out what's your due date. And he goes, "Okay, so your due date is May 13th. It was my dad's birthday."
Oh, wow.
Just a wow. Turns out she was a little late, and we didn't want to push it, but she was born on May 26th, his mother's birthday.
Wow.
No way.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
Yeah, May 26th.
Man, that's awesome.
2000, right?
2000, correct?
That's what I'm thinking.
Yeah.
The same exact
Yeah,
day, same
2000.
year, like they're the same age.
That's really crazy.
Yeah,
That is
pretty-
really cool.
Pretty good stuff.
A lot of really cool connections here sitting at this
Yes.
table, so that's awesome. And so that's part of what we want to talk about, not necessarily the connections, but we wanted to talk about, one of the things since we started this podcast, Mark, was we've had some officers or former officers who've reached out to us who have faced that inevitable R word referred to as retirement, and have said, man, would love to hear somebody talk about life in retirement or after retirement, and guys trying to figure out how to live life after all the changes of walking away from working in law enforcement and that kind of stuff. And so when Darren and I were kind of tossing this around, he said, "Man, I think I'm going to reach out to Mark and talk to him." And so that's kind of what we want to talk about today, is what has life been like. But before we jump into that, you told us about Carilion and your position there. Give us a little bit of background on your law enforcement career prior to Carilion.
Well, I actually started out with the Henry County Sheriff's Department in 1990, and I tried to get on with Martinsville Police because at the time that was kind of the premier agency down there. And I remember the assistant police chief said, "Hey, we haven't had any turnover in 3 years, so you might want to try somewhere else." And so I did. I went to Henry County. Got hired at Henry County in 1990, and 2 weeks after I was there, Martinsville actually called me and said, "Hey, we got a job for you." Well, it's too late then,
Yeah.
So I stayed with Henry County for about a year and a half, worked in the jail as a correctional officer, actually went to school for corrections and came out, and almost as soon as I came out of school, they sent me to road school. Ended up going to road school down in Martinsville, worked as a road deputy for a while. And then in 1991, there was a huge pay disparity between sheriff's offices and municipal departments. I mean, it was huge. At the time, it was about $10,000. And in 1990, $10,000 was a lot of money.
Absolutely.
That was huge. And I'll never forget my checks at Henry County, where I was bringing home about $1,100 a month. And we were able to live, but it wasn't the lifestyle I wanted to live,
Sure.
Yeah.
And so the pay disparity was just too much. And I remember talking to deputies that had been there like 10 years, and they weren't making what you could start out at Martinsville. So it was really a no-brainer. I had to for my financial future. And so I went there in 1991, stayed there for 25 years, did the gamut of jobs there. I worked in patrol, was a patrol corporal, an investigator, did a 6-month light duty assignment as an animal control officer, was a lieutenant over at criminal investigations, was a training coordinator at the police academy.
Wow.
I was a member of the Piedmont Regional not Piedmont Regional, it was the Piedmont Homicide Task Force. I worked on Regional Drug Task Force and worked on there was only 2 times in history we did wiretaps. And I worked on one of the wiretap cases on a big drug case down there one time. Worked after I retired. I was before retirement actually. I was contracted by some attorneys to help defend police officers in constitutional lawsuits, and was recognized in federal court as an expert in constitutional law, and was helping defend officers who were sued for constitutional violations. I've done that a couple of times, and done a lot of teaching. Worked for the Virginia Community Policing Institute for about 9 years, I think it was.
Wow.
Did over 4,000 hours of classroom instruction and growing. It's probably close to 5,000 now. I've taught 50 plus basic schools, ranging from criminal law, constitutional law, community policing. I've taught just about everything, interview, interrogation. Big part of my career has been instructing and teaching. I kind of look back now, I'm like, when did I have time to do anything? Because the prep work for teaching constitutional law is almost as bad as the hours you teach. And I remember when I first started, I read every constitutional law case in Virginia for the past 20 years. I just sat down and took 6 months, and every night was reading every appellate case in Virginia that dealt with constitutional law to catch myself up to where I thought I could be an expert in it.
I'll be honest with you, I'm falling asleep thinking about that.
Yeah.
And I feel like I feel a little less intelligent than before we started this podcast. Like, wow, that's impressive.
Well, when he said, for me,
like,
it was
just.
Yeah, I wonder how many
Class
officers. I wonder how many officers are sitting around reading constitutional law cases at night. That we work with on a daily basis.
Yeah, just check my wife; she'll tell you. I was asking she, what are you doing up at 11 o'clock, 12 o'clock at night? I was just reading. Just trying to. I was so young when I started teaching. I think I'd been a patrol officer about 5 years, and they asked me to teach constitutional law. Well, I really didn't. Be honest with you, I didn't know what I was getting into. And I remember the director telling me, hey, look, your first class is going to be filled with people with 20, 30 years experience. And I just thought, there's no way I can walk in a classroom and get the respect of those guys if I don't really know my stuff. Yeah. And so I just said, hey, this is what I'm going to do. I mean, wow. I had done some, prior to getting to law enforcement, I'd done some work at the Commonwealth Attorney's Office in Henry County, just trying to learn the job. Of policing, because I thought I might want to go to law school. And while I was in there, I'll never forget an attorney named Gary Cardwell. He's showing me how to write briefs and things. And he said, Mark, he said, do you like doing homework for a living? I said, no, not really. He goes, well, being a lawyer is like doing homework for a living. And if you don't like doing homework, you're not going to like being a lawyer. And he said, you might want to go try riding with a deputy and see what that looks like for you. And the first time I rode, I knew that's what I wanted to do. I mean, it was a marriage of the two. It was the excitement and the legal part and being able to put them both together that got me. And I mean, I knew immediately, yep, this is what I want to do, and worked out for me.
That's really cool, man. I tell you, one thing you said earlier, you said I did a 6-month light duty assignment in animal control, and I thought to myself, that doesn't sound like light duty to me. Like dealing with animals and mad animals and.
It was a pretty good gig. I actually thought it was a good job and for somebody. But what's weird is I had cancer and had to go out on light duty for the animal control officer who got cancer. He wasn't as fortunate as I was. He didn't make it, and but I did the 6 weeks and came out and had a lot of respect for that job after that. I mean, it takes a special person to be able to do that. But I'm actually glad I did it because I like to be able to in law enforcement kind of touch base with everything, to better understand everybody's function. Right. Because, when you work patrol, you only think patrol's the only world, versus when you've worked a regional drug task force or a regional homicide task force or worked as a supervisor, administrator. I mean, I was a lieutenant for 17 years, and I kind of, when I came to Carilion, during my interview process, they said, hey, would you want to be a supervisor? And I said, no, I don't. I just want to come to work and go home. and that's the true story. I said, no, I absolutely not. I just want to, I'm retired, and this is a second gig for me, and I just want to come and do my job. And, after I got to working at Carilion, I was like, I love working here. And so I kind of felt obligated to, do what I could for the organization and keep moving up if that's what they wanted me to do. And that's kind of where I led to where I'm at now as a captain. So before we're going to get ready and dive into this whole retirement word and retirement life, but before we do, before you retired, what was kind of the last? I mean, you've got so much experience; it's crazy. But what was kind of the last stint before retirement? What was the last thing that you did prior to retirement that kind of led you into that? Well, the last 6 months I was with Martinsville, the chief asked me if I would work as a training coordinator at the police academy, and just to kind of cruise out the last 6 months and not get involved in cases, because I was a polygraph examiner, I was over investigations, and you don't want to be coming back to court a lot when you retire. And so he gave me that position, once I'd made the decision to retire. And, and that helped me transition, quite a bit actually, because I can't imagine now going back and go, you work a patrol every day or investigations every day, and, you just worked a homicide 2 days later, and now it's time to retire, Well, I was able to transition. So I had an easier path for me than just stopping cold turkey.
Yeah. So all right. So let's talk about retirement. That's what we're here to talk about today. This has been I love the foundation we've laid to get to this point, man. To hear so much about your story, absolutely love it. So you talk about those last 6 months. What was the kind of the piece that got you start thinking about retirement? What was kind of the catalyst that kind of helped you start thinking, yeah, I'm now starting to look towards that date of retirement? What was that for you?
Stress.
Okay.
Absolutely stress. The last job I had prior to, to phasing out I was a lieutenant over criminal investigation. So, I was in charge of supervising every major crime that came into the city. I had to work on a case one time where I was hired to defend somebody in court. And I had to go back and look at all the cases, homicide cases I'd worked. And I was able to document that I had worked on 42 homicide cases.
Wow.
Okay. And it actually was probably a couple more. After I did it, I forgot a couple that I had assisted with another agency. And, when you're on vacation, and I remember this, the last vacation I took before I retired, I got a call from my investigator and said, "Hey, we just had a homicide. I need to know what to do here, And I said, I'm on vacation, and I can't get away from it. And, the stress of investigations until you've worked there, and I look at it like a grocery store kind of, okay? You never get the shelves full, okay? You're trying to make the store look pretty, and you're constantly stocking, but you can't ever get it full. And investigations is a lot like that, where, you try to get caught up, but you never can, because while you're working this case, another one comes down the pipe. And I'll never forget the day I walked out of the back door of the police department. The last, turned in the keys. I can't get back in the building. I walked out and I got on my phone. I called my mom, and I said, "Hey, look, I'm finally leaving." And she said, "I can hear your voice is different." And I remember that feeling, that like a whoosh feeling, like, oh my gosh, the stress is gone. I feel like a different person. And it was like, I literally felt like a different person. So you may not realize the stress you're under or what it feels like, but I definitely felt it leave my body the second I walked out the door, and I knew that was the right decision.
That's awesome. Holy cow.
So you don't realize it, but I think stress, I'm certainly not a medical professional, but I just think stress has more effect on your health than just about anything, because I felt so much better when I walked out, knowing that I didn't have to walk. There was no more cases, that I wasn't going to get that dump feeling that I'm going to be able to go on vacation. I'm not going to get a call, there's a homicide. And, I've got that looking forward to as soon as I walk back in the door. It was the stress. And, and I think, there was an assistant police chief that I worked for early on, and I'll never forget these words he told me one time. He said, "Mark, there is life after MPD." And I put that aside. I didn't know what he was talking about at the time. After I retired, those words came back to me. I was like, wow, the guy knew what he was talking about. There is life after that life, and you can substitute RPD, CPD, MPD. You can substitute any three letters you want.
Sure.
There is life after that world that you don't know about unless you make that jump. Yeah. And again, everybody's situation is different. I mean, there's no one, one way to do retirement. There's no one way to tell everybody you got to do this, because everybody's situation is different financially or spiritually or mentally. But, there's a reason why we get to retire early. Law enforcement retirement kind of forces you to look at that financial part and say, hey, do I want to take this money and go somewhere else? But there's just a reason that I think the retirement system is set up that way. The climate's changed quite a bit with hiring and staffing and employees now. I've never seen a time in my history where it was easier to get a job in law enforcement. I mean, because people aren't wanting to get into the field like they were when I did. I mean, I remember times, and even in Martinsville, that we would have 80 to 100 applicants every time.
Wow.
I mean, every time, because I had to do the polygraphs, all the background stuff. And, I specifically remember one time we had 88 applicants for like three or four positions.
That's crazy.
Okay.
That is crazy.
And out of those 88, it got down to about 12, after, testing and physical fitness and all that other stuff. And then the 12 dwindled down to like, 5 or 6. And they were just capable of being hired. That didn't mean that they were great candidates. They passed everything. And so, then you're like, okay, who are the best of these? Well, now if you have 4 applicants, a lot of agencies are saying they have, 20 people instead of 80 to 100. And I've talked to a lot of agencies, and it's
absolutely. As we're recording this, we're sitting in an academy, and we interact with several departments, and every department has that challenge, like you said, of trying to find good applicants, and there used to be here. I can remember one of the departments we serve that talked about having a couple hundred qualified candidates to fill those few positions, and it was very difficult to try to get into policing at one time. We don't see that kind of influx of candidates like we used to many years ago. It's a very different time.
It's law enforcement in general has changed completely from even 10 years ago. Body cameras change things for the good and bad. There's great. I like body cameras from the standpoint where, you can go back and recreate the scene exactly the way it's supposed to be most of the time, because sometimes the camera didn't catch everything, but it's better than nothing. It protects officers. What I don't like about body cameras is, like in where I came from, the policy was anytime you had an interaction with a citizen, you had to have it on. Well, if I'm just going to talk to somebody, I don't feel comfortable or talking to somebody, I'm being recorded. You can't really have an honest conversation. So there's good and bads with that. But I think it protects the public. I think it protects the officer.
Sure.
I think we need to use common sense policy with that. And, that's a whole nother story, but it's just the whole climate's changed with policing. So when officers retire now, there's lots of options, just tons of options for people.
Yeah. So let me ask you this: was the initial decision for you to retire, was that a decision you struggled through, or was that something that you just knew that it's time and I'm just making that decision and going with it?
For me, I knew it was time.
Okay.
There was no question. I mean, I hear a lot of officers say, "Well, I'm retiring next year," and then next year comes around, they don't.
Yeah.
I'm retiring next year, and then they don't. And I remember specifically telling the chief I worked for the time, I said, "Listen, I'm not bluffing. Okay, I'm leaving this date." And actually, my retirement date was December 1st, and I ended up leaving in October because I'd miscalculated the number of hours I had in vacation and sick time and everything else. And I was sitting at the academy one day. I went, "Holy cow! My math's terrible." And I called my wife and I said, "Look, I could stay till December 1st, and we could get a pretty good chunk of money here, or I could leave now." And she goes, "What do you want to do?" And I'm like, "I want to leave now." And I did. And I'd do that again in a second. That little bit of money wasn't worth it to me.
Out of curiosity, how much time was there between retiring from Martinsville and then going to serve where you currently are?
I think it was about 2 or 3 months. Probably 2 months.
Okay.
And I had no intention of coming to Carilion. None. I mean, I'd worked some homicide cases, had been up here, and dealt with Carilion with some homicide cases, people in the ICU units and things, but it really wasn't, it was nowhere on my radar. And when I retired, I didn't have a plan. I'll be the first to tell you. The only plan that we had put in place was I had gotten myself financially to a place where I didn't have to go back to work. And I didn't know if I could stay out of work because I didn't know mentally. I remember talking to my dad, and when my dad retired, my dad was scared of retiring. He was always scared of it. And then after he retired, I'll never forget him telling me it was the worst mistake he ever made, not retiring when he could. And so he had a great experience not going back into anything, So that's what I had to look at. So when I retired, I really didn't have that plan of what am I going to do next, other than financially, I'm ready to do that if I need to. I don't have to go back to work. In hindsight now, with the economy that we just have been through, I don't think anybody could just survive on retirement, police retirement. Probably could have, probably can, but don't know that I want to,
Sure.
So I think that's the first thing that people have to understand, is that you have to look at your financial situation prior to making that decision. You really have to plan. And my wife and I did. We had planned. We got out of debt, no house payments, no nothing. So we were ready to do that. So I had time. And actually my plan was, okay, I'm going to stay out 90 days. And if I really like this, I'm going to stay out. Okay. And so what happened was, day one, I'm retired. What do I do today? Okay, today I mow the yard. Okay, tomorrow I paint the door. The next day I fix the faucet. I would have a plan, every day to accomplish something. Or, today I'm going to go work out. Worked out a lot. I will say that. Worked out a lot. That became a daily thing. Was okay. Well, I don't have any excuses. I'm going to go work out. And I started to feel, especially after the first month, okay, this is not gonna end well. It's not for me. And I spoke to a judge. He was my last general district court judge, and I saw him one day, and he was retired as well. And I said, hey, how's retirement going for you? He says, I hate it. I said, really? I said, what? He said, I hate it. And I'm like, what's going on? He goes, I just feel worthless. I said, well, why don't you go back and substitute some? He goes, I don't want to do that either. He didn't have a plan. And I haven't talked to him since then, but he was struggling with it. And, Carilion came about simply because I had a couple of officers I worked with, and they came up here. And they kept calling, they kept badgering me. Man, you need to come up here. And I was like, I'm not driving an hour to work, and I'm not putting on a gun belt ever again, and I'm not working. I mean, all these, I'm not. Yeah. And then I'll never forget, one of them said this line, and it'll always stick with me. He says, Mark, he said, this is police heaven at Carilion. He said those words. He said, police heaven. And I told my wife, I said, if I don't like it, I can always go somewhere else. I'm going to give it a shot. And from day one, it's been the best job I've ever had.
That's really cool.
I've never had a job where I haven't had a bad day. Now, there are tough days. Law enforcement's tough. Even in Carilion, you have tough days. But I've never had a bad day because we have an organization that supports us, and we have great leadership. I mean, it's just everything works there. It's still policing, but it's not government policing. It's not apples to apples. But it's just for a police retirement job, it is fantastic. I mean, it just is. I mean, anybody that comes there and thinks that that's what they were used to be doing, they're just wrong. It's not the same. It's not apples to apples. We have some situations come up like everywhere. That's why we have a police department and a level 1 trauma center. But we have enough staff to handle every situation that comes about. So it's just police heaven. Yeah, I'd say it is from a retirement standpoint.
I love to hear you talk about like the amount of support that you have in an organization that's really behind you.
Well, our mission's different at Carilion. Yeah. Private policing and government policing are different. Okay, our mission is simple, and that's to keep our staff and our patients safe while they're in the hospital. It's not to go out and look for violations of law and enforce things. It's we're there to make sure that patients can come into our facility and they feel safe, and our staff feels safe while they're being treated. It's really that simple. Now we use the law as a tool to fix situations. If we need to arrest someone that's getting out of hand, or we have situations that require that. But it's always the last thing that we look for to do. It's not something that's in the forefront. The government policing, you're always, it's almost like you're always looking to place a charge or write a ticket, or, the numbers always come up. That's not what we're at Carilion. We're not there for that. Matter of fact, we don't. I tell people all the time, if you make one arrest, in a year, no one's going to go, hey, Mark, why did you make that arrest? Or, you only made one arrest last year? Is that it? No one's ever going to say that.
Yeah.
If you make no arrests, that means, hey, that's good. That's a good thing.
Yeah.
And so it's a whole different environment, and it takes the stress away when, like I came from a department in Martinsville with the chief down there that was numbers. Okay. You don't see that at Carilion. It's not why we're there. Our mission's completely different. So it takes that whole stress thing away. That's why I say from a retirement standpoint, I look at retirement in phases. Okay. Phase 1 is the tough one. That's when you jump ship. I'm jumping into unknown waters. I'm leaving the thing that's safe, and I'm, you know what to expect every day, and all of a sudden it's gone, and those relationships you had are gone or fading because you're no longer there every day. That's the scary one, and you have to prepare for that. I mean, I would tell everybody 6 months, even a year out, start thinking about what's next. If this is what you're going to do, look at your financial situation to see if you can. Look at the job market, talk to people in other departments. But what I'm finding is that probably the majority of law enforcement officers that retire, they do retire and go into another line of law enforcement. With sheriff's offices, there are things that you can do as you get older, like civil process, courtroom security, things that, don't require you chasing someone, at night, So there are things that you can do. You can, go from this department to this department into a lighter job. A lot of retired officers are going to school resource. That's like probably the number one thing that I'm seeing.
We've seen a lot of that.
Yep.
Yeah. So, those are lighter policing jobs. I kind of equate those with what we do at Carilion in a sense that they're just not, you're not going into a school to look to arrest kids or, you're there as a presence to secure the building and make sure that they can, educate their kids in a safe environment. Same thing with Carilion. We're there to have a safe environment so that our patients and our staff can do what they do to heal patients.
So you said something a minute ago, and I think Darren and I, one of the conversations that we've had with current law enforcement who are talking with former law enforcement, and then us having conversations with former law enforcement, one thing that we hear a lot is the struggle after the fact with relationships with people who they used to have daily relationships with. I recently had someone say to me, I was used to talking to them every day, and I thought after I retired, I knew I wouldn't hear from them every day, but I thought I would hear from them some, and now I hear from them none. What was you brought up the changing of the relationships? For you, what was that experience like, and those relationships that you had at the PD? What was that experience like, making that move from being there full time to going into retirement, and then the difference that made in your relationships?
Yeah, you definitely don't talk to the same people all the time, and I guess the difference for me is that I was always in a supervisory role, especially the last 17 years. So in a supervisory role, you can't really. There's got to be a little bit of separation between you and the people you supervise. The relationships I had were with the people that were older than me. Probably my previous supervisors. The guys that had retired. Not so much with the people that I supervised. I got great advice the very first time that I was promoted in supervision from my very first police chief, and I'll never forget it. And you call him in the office, and I think the position was corporal, and he said, Mark, you need to remember something. You can be friendly, but you can't be friends. And I went, what's he talking about? I didn't know at the time what he was talking about. Now I do. Because supervisors have to do tough things sometimes. Yeah. And if that relationship's too close, you can't do it. Now, I don't mean to say that, you have to separate yourself completely, but there's definitely a line in supervision. So it wasn't that tough for me. But I still, to this day, I still have relationships with the people that I worked with. And I kind of equate it to this. You get what you put into it. How many phone calls did you make? How many times did you initiate reaching out to a coworker? So if you're expecting everybody just to call you and come around, it's what you put into it is how to make that happen.
I've often told people similar kind of thing, that hey, give away what you want to receive.
Correct.
And whether you call that sowing and reaping or however you want to look at it, there's a lot of wisdom behind what you just said.
But, it goes back to that line, there's life after MPD. Okay. So I come to Carilion, and all of a sudden I've got these new set of friends, new relationships. And that's why I say people, they really lock themselves in by not taking that jump, by thinking, well, this is all there is. I'm comfortable here, not knowing what else is out there. Now, I'm not saying it's always perfect for everybody, that the next situation is going to be perfect, but you don't ever know. I mean, I've got some really great relationships now that I've come to Carilion. I met some great people. I've been influenced by some really great leaders that I'd never seen before. You only know about leadership from the people that in that one department. And I thought we had good leaders until I came to Carilion and I saw great leaders.
Wow.
And it was a big difference. And I'm not throwing off, because I think the first police chief I ever had was the best police chief I've ever worked for. He was way ahead of his time. Just way ahead of his time. When I look back now, he was doing things in 1990 that departments are doing now. And wow. I'm not saying he wasn't a great leader. He was a great leader. And I've worked with a few, but you're locked into what you know until you broaden your horizons and see, wow, these people really, and I have grown as a leader since I've been at Carilion, just because I've seen great leadership that I'd never seen before.
I'm circling back for a minute, because I'm just now, it's just now registering with me. You said you started with Martinsville PD in 91.
Correct. So we're Henry County in 1990.
Okay. So I'm really excited. I graduated high school in 91, and I'm kind of glad I got out of there and went to South Carolina, so I can say, like, you didn't write me a speeding ticket.
Yeah. Oh, because I would have. Yeah. At the time, I was locked in. Yeah.
Well, I remember a fellow by the name of Sergeant Slaughter.
I remember Sergeant Slaughter.
Who may have caught me with my dad's car. I was at the end of Mulberry going down to the country club during school hours, because we were setting up for a jazz band concert. And I came flying out of there in my dad's Crown Vic, because he was changing the oil in my car that day. And I had his Crown Vic, and Slaughter saw me, but he had someone pulled over on a side road, and he told my dad, he estimated I was going 70 miles an hour. And I thought, well, it's because I hadn't gotten up to 85, 90 yet.
Yeah.
And, but, Martinsville's, smaller town. Everybody knew Dad drove a school bus, and Slaughter went over there and talked to my dad. And it led to a very interesting conversation, and me losing my keys for a while.
I had a specific way to handle juveniles, and another officer taught me this, and that was, I never wrote a ticket to a juvenile. Okay. So what I would do is I'd get the phone out, because back then we had bag phones, when we first started. Mm-hmm. And I would say, okay, call your parent and let them know where you're at, let them know what you did. And if they want to talk to me, they can. And they always did. And I would ask the parent, what are you going to do? What are you going to do about this violation? Well, I'm going to take their life. Okay, well, I'm going to take it at your word, And it was very effective for me, because juveniles, they always gave a first-time offender in court back in Martinsville. They used to do that. I don't know if they still do that now, but I always just let parents take care of their kids driving. But didn't have a lot, honestly. Pulled over juveniles less than adults, quite frankly.
Well, I thank you for that little sidebar. I'm just very, very grateful you didn't pull me over when I was young and a little more foolish.
I don't know that much has changed, at least with the driving portion. I'm going to be honest.
We need to move on and get back to this retirement talk here, Adam. What are you doing?
So, there's an old saying, Mark, that hindsight is always 20/20. That sometimes, and we've kind of danced around this question I'm getting ready to ask you. We've really danced around the answer to this question, but I wanted to see if we could kind of nail down maybe an answer for guys that are thinking about retirement, ladies thinking about retirement, maybe people who have recently retired and they're still trying to figure this thing out. Looking back at everything and going through the retirement process and not knowing you were going to go to Carilion and that working out the way it did, what do you know now that you wish you knew then?
I wish I had planned. I didn't have a plan. I literally had no plan. It was just retire. And the only thing that I had thought through was financial stability at the time. Can I do it financially? I hadn't looked at another career. I hadn't looked at anything. It was just, I know that I can retire, I can pay my bills, and I'm going to be fine. But I didn't plan. In hindsight now, 6 months out, I should have been looking at what's next. I know now that retirement is not a final word. Okay, retirement is
Man, that's so good.
Yeah,
it's a phased approach. Okay, phase one, making the big jump. I'm leaving the place I'm comfortable with. I'm going to get that retirement check that I've worked so hard for, and then phase two is what's next. What's the step down, less stress. I would not, I wouldn't recommend someone retiring and going into another high stress job. I just wouldn't do it. I mean, that's why you've retired, because you wanted to get out of that. And I would plan, I would research, where are the places I want to go? Do I want to get back in law enforcement? Do I want another position? I mean, I know a guy up here in Roanoke that he got out and he's selling real estate now. That's what he wants to do. And tried to get him back to come in law enforcement. He's done with it. That's fine. He planned and he made a plan. But I would talk to other people that are retired, and I'll give you an example of great retirement advice the guy gave me. This was an older officer. He said, never retire in the winter. He said, wait until the spring.
Wow.
And I said, why? He goes, because you retire in the winter and you don't have something to go to. He said, the weather's terrible. You can't get outside. You feel locked in. It's depressing.
Man, that is.
And he said, wait until spring. That when, if you're going to do that and you don't have something to look for, you don't have another thing, just wait. And, springtime comes, you'll be able to get outside. You'll have yard work to do. You'll have something more to do than being locked inside in the winter. And I thought that's actually great advice.
Yeah, really is very practical.
Yeah. And so, I talked to other people, plan, look at your financial stability, figure out what it is you want to do, talk to other officers that are retired, and have a plan. I can't stress that enough about, just don't jump ship with like I did. Mine worked out okay for me, but in hindsight, it could have been a disaster. If these guys hadn't have come to Carilion, I probably would have got stuck going back into something else that I didn't really want to do. I didn't realize Carilion was going to be such a great situation for me and such a great position, but I got lucky because I didn't plan. Now I wouldn't do that again. In hindsight, I'm okay. This is what's going to happen. This is how it's going to happen. I'm going to research. I'm going to talk to other officers who have done that. I'm going to figure out before I leave. I would actually even create some space. I highly recommend when people retire, take a month off, decompress. Before you go to another job, work it out with your new employer. Hey, look, I need to take a month off before I come in. And because I wanted to feel that. I wanted to feel, what is it actually like? Because at first, when you retire, it just feels like you're on vacation.
Sure.
Makes sense. And it's like you're used to, okay, 7 days is up, it's time to go back, and that's not true. So I would work it out with my new employer to have a gap, and to get some things done you want to do. I took a trip down to Florida when I retired, because I knew I probably wouldn't get to see that family down in Florida, for years if I didn't do it now. So I did some things I wanted to do that I knew time and jobs would hold me back, because jobs hold you back from doing a lot of things. When I went down there, my uncle told me a story. And he pulled out, we were out in the garage, and he said, what are you going to do now? I said, I don't know. And he takes a tape ruler and he starts zipping it out. He keeps going out, and he takes it out to 76 inches. And he goes, you know what that is? I said, no. He goes, that's the life expectancy of a man in the United States, 76 years. He said, how old are you? I said, 50. He went, zip. Now it's down to 26. That thing's about this long. He goes, what are you going to do? And I'm like, wow. I didn't realize that.
Wow.
That's powerful.
Yeah. And I'm like, holy, when you see it that way, like, oh, that's, and those aren't all going to be good years.
Sure.
And I can expand on that. It's the rule of 20. You know how many days are in 20 years? For me and you, that's significant because we're going to be old men at that time.
That's right.
So in 20 years, there's 7,300 days. Okay. So you're asleep a third of those. Okay. The other third, you're probably working. Okay. So you're going to end up getting about 2,400 days out of that. And those 2,400 days are not going to be all great days where you're healthy and able to do all the things you want to do. And so really just take half of those days and say half of those you're healthy. If I told you in 20 years you had 1,200 days to do exactly what you wanted to do in the time that you have left, what would you spend those 1,200 days with? Because the reality is that's about all you got. Sure, people live in the 80s and 90s, but I got an uncle that just passed away a couple of weeks ago. He's 95 years old and had great quality of life, but he's still, when you get in your 90s, life's not great. I just went up to Withville last week and spoke to my aunt. She's 90 and she's, barely walking around. She's got a great life for a 90-year-old, but, doing the things that you and I want to do now, 20 years is nothing, if that's what we've got left. I'm 58 and that 20 years takes me past my life expectancy. If I had 1,200 days, what do I want to do with it? So that next decision you make in retirement has got to be decisions where you go, what do I want to do? What are my expectations? And look at that limited time that we have left to do the things that you really want to do. Jerry Seinfeld the other day made this statement. He said, retirement is wasting your time the way you want to do it.
That's awesome.
Wasting your time the way you want to do it. Okay, and that's true. I want a day where I could do what I want to do. Okay, and so that's where the planning comes in. Is like, do you want to work full time? Is finances keeping you from going part time? My next phase is I'm going to work part time. I'm never going to stop working as long as I can get up and move, because I've just learned that the people that do that stop moving, stop doing things, your body shuts down quicker. Yeah. I've been an athlete my whole life. I was quarterbacking a fall football league just a few years ago in my 50s, and about, 6 months ago, I pulled out a football in my backyard and tried to throw one. And I was like, oh my gosh, and I used to be able to throw it 60 yards and I'm like in my 50s and I'm like, wow. I couldn't get it out of my driveway. I was like, what happened? Because you quit doing those things, you quit, the guys that play softball in their 60s, they're still able to run. Now you stop playing softball and you stop sprinting, go sprint down the road one time, see what it feels like. Yeah. You stop doing that stuff. So you got to keep moving. So I don't know that retirement is a death word. Retirement is a phased approach into getting to a point where you can spend your time doing what you want to do. And making the finances work, because that's the reality. We have to have insurance, and getting to that magic 65. And, my goal is to reevaluate at 62. And if I still like what I'm doing in Carilion, I'll probably stay. But if I see that it's time to, if my body starts shutting down the next 3.5 years and go, hey, maybe I need to get a little closer to home, then we'll reevaluate. But, everybody's got to have that plan, and probably the most important thing of all is you have to worry about your health. You have to be concerned about your health at retirement. And because I look at it like this, I worked my butt off and I got called out in the middle of the night more times than I ever want to remember. And I dealt with more stress to get to this point where I got that pension check. I want to enjoy it.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And you can't do that if you're physically not in a position to do that. And, I look at law enforcement now, overall from a physical fitness standpoint, and we've gone backwards. There used to be really strict height, weight requirements, physical requirements, and we've had to, law enforcement in general, we've had to back those requirements down just to staff our departments. Correct. Because you can't do, at the height and weight I'm at right now, I would have not even been a viable applicant for the Henry County Sheriff's Office in 1990. I mean, and I'm in good shape. And they would have said, sorry, son, you need to come back next time. You can't do that now. But I don't say weight is everything, because there's healthy big people that can run and athletic and that kind of thing. But physical fitness standards have definitely gone back, and people have kind of put that on the back burner. I've kind of done it my whole life. I've always worked out. I've always run. I've always been mindful of, what my health is. And you have to think that's got to be a priority in retirement. And you have to think about that.
What do you think about this? I had a conversation with a retired fellow who he was command staff and retired here not too long ago, and he said, one of the things that was so helpful for him was having someone help him with a resume, because and I see this a lot where officers, because they're coming from that law enforcement background, and they what this guy was able to tell me is that he found somebody who had a background in law enforcement and knows how to help put a resume together if guys want to go outside of the law enforcement realm to other things, but they just don't know how to do that, and how their experience in law enforcement translates to the civilian world. He said he found that getting somebody to help him with a resume was very helpful. Have any thoughts on that, or what?
I think what you're talking about is, how do we transfer out of the law enforcement world into the civilian world? Mm-hmm. And one thing I learned about, especially working in criminal investigations, is that you get to see the inside of a lot of businesses and how they operate. Okay. For instance, I remember an embezzlement case. I worked at a doctor's office, and I had to spend a couple of days just learning how they do their accounts receivable and how they took money in, how it got paid out. And in every business, embezzlement or those types of crime, you get to see how things work. And so a lot of people look at other jobs because of their relationships they've got with business owners or things. Right now, the climate for employment for law enforcement is wide open. Law enforcement officers will do these things for you. They'll come to work drug free. Okay, they'll get to work on time. They'll be trustworthy. Okay, they're dedicated. They're high, they have high morals. Those are all the easy things that you have to be a good employee. And you get them all with law enforcement officers, at least the majority of them.
Sure.
Okay. So, those skills translate to almost anything. You can, every job you go to, they're going to train you, unless it's a professional, like a dentist or a doctor or something, but any job you go into or a business, they're going to train you what they want to do. And so law enforcement officers, have a high demand because of their ability to do those things I just mentioned. They're going to get to work on time. They're going to be loyal. They're going to come in drug free. They're going to be, stand up people. They're going to represent your company well. And so right now, anybody in law enforcement can get a job just about anywhere in line of work. That's to me right now. I've never seen a time in our history where it's easier to get a job. I mean, since I've been at Carilion, I've had multiple job offers, and they were all good, and closer to home. But I love working where I'm at, and it's like I always look at the one thing is it really worth going back? And it has nothing to do with the financial aspect of it. It's just I look at quality of life, and yes. I've never had a job where I come to work and I have never had a bad day. That just doesn't happen. Wow. Now there's stressful days, don't get me wrong, but I've had so much experience in dealing with stress that this is nothing, so everybody's situation's different, yep. And so whatever works, but the one consistent thing is officers that are getting ready to do it need to plan. And that's the one thing that I didn't do. And I got lucky. My situation worked out for me, but my situation could have been ugly too. I could have gone back into something I didn't want to do because I didn't plan. I just fell into something that I got lucky. Now, again, hindsight, I would have looked at my financial situation. I would have looked at what do I want to do. I would have researched through other people that are working there, and I would have figured out what's the best timing, because I would highly recommend people taking a little time off afterwards, particularly about 2 months if they can stand it. That's the thing. Can you stand it? Because after that first couple of weeks, you're like, oh, vacation's over. It's time to go back to work. We're so programmed that 7-day work week, that you don't think about that how programmed we are to, I have this time. I wanted to feel it. That's why I was giving myself 90 days, and I didn't last 90 days. About 2 months, I was gotta go. This is not working. I've I have to feel that the need to progress.
Yeah. So we're gonna tie this thing up or close this thing out, but there's one question that I thought about in all of this that we didn't have on our agenda for today that I'd be interested to ask to see what your viewpoint is. For officers who are listening, or maybe even spouses of officers that are listening, what would you say to spouses of officers whose husband or wife are looking at retiring from law enforcement? What would be good for them to know as their husband or wife are looking towards retirement? What things should they be thinking about, and what could they do to be an encouragement and be a help to their spouse as they're kind of coming into this season?
Well, I mean, I think I look back at my situation, and my wife supports me whatever I do. It's really never been an issue. It's just understanding that if you have this, police officers have this thing where we are identified as this position. Okay, your whole life you've been identified as the man or the woman that is going to take charge of situations and fix things, and you have this identity, and law enforcement definitely has a stigma to it. And then all of a sudden one day you're not that person. Okay, you're just not. The day you hang that badge up, you're not that person anymore, and it takes some time to okay, I'm not that dude. Okay, I don't have to worry about all that anymore, and that's where I see a lot of people struggle is their identity. They lose that identity. That's why a lot of them get back into law enforcement, because they feel that loss of, they want that feeling, because it's hard to go away. For me, when I leave work and I go home, policing is the last thing that's ever been on my mind. Even my whole career, I was able to separate policing from home life. And my wife would tell you, very seldom did I ever even talk about a case. Or, I mean, there'd been a couple times I'd been some drag out fights where my uniforms got torn. I'd come home and she'd, what happened? I just got a little tussle tonight. No big deal, And, I always left it at the door. I left policing at the door. A lot of people can't do that. And I think it's the one thing that has been helpful for me and my wife and even my daughter is that they don't see me as the police officer. They may think that, because that's my job. But when I come home, I put on my sweatpants, my T-shirt, and I'm just dad, or I'm husband. I don't play that part. I don't carry a gun 100% of the time I go somewhere and carry my badge. I don't do that. No, I carry a gun sometimes, depending on where I'm going. But I'm there's some people that no matter where they go, they always carry a gun. They're always ready to do policing. I've never been that guy, and I'm not saying that's a bad thing. I'm just saying that I just learned for my mental health that I don't want to come home and be police person 100% of the time. And it's been a gift really for me, is that I've been able to do that. So spouses need to be prepared that there is a transition time when they've got to come off of that, that identity. My dad talked about that when he retired, because my dad was the director of the 911 center in Martinsville. And he was afraid, that was something that he talked to me about, was that identity that he had as the 911 director, is that he's no longer that guy. And I think it's twice as bad in policing, because you've been so identified as this, that everywhere you go, that's officer such and such. I still have people in Martinsville that, that I go in a grocery store. Weren't you that officer that used to work here? And I'm like, well, yeah, used to be, But I think officers, and I would give this advice to anybody: leave it at the door. Leave it at the door. You have to have that separate life.
It's so very important for officers to have an identity away from the uniform, and you hit on some very important points with that, and maybe for the spouses just to keep in mind to maybe extend a little extra grace in that transition. Retirement's a difficult transition for anybody from from any job, any career. But I think from the law enforcement career, that transition, the potential is there to be a difficult one. And so I'm so grateful that you have hit on the things that you have and talked about the preparation for that. And, we've seen people do it well, and we've seen people struggle with it. And our hope with this episode, and we may do another episode as well, and on this topic, because it is so important. Our hope is that something that was said today would truly be beneficial in helping those that are approaching retirement, and even for younger men and women in uniform, that just maybe tuck away something that they have heard today for down the road when they are approaching that retirement. Maybe for some of them that's the furthest thing from their mind, but I can tell you as a guy that's lived a few decades or so now, time goes by quick, and that retirement, it'll get there faster than you think. So hold on to something that you've heard today from Mark, and that you can pull out later and hopefully help you with that transition into your retirement down the road.
Well, Mark, we really appreciate. Thank you so much for taking the time.
Thanks for having me.
Really
Glad to do it.
Really thankful you were here, man. There's so many nuggets. I was actually trying to type some stuff into my notes on my phone, and some things I was like, man, that's so good. Just things I want to hold on to, and I can't wait to edit this and listen to it back and pull some more stuff out that I couldn't type fast enough. So I really, really appreciate it, man.
Sure,
thank you for
having me.
So, well, everyone, thanks so much for joining us today. We look forward to seeing you back a week from today for our next episode.